and welcome to Hear These Words, a podcast from Good Shepherd Episcopal Church in Tequesta, Florida. I'm Derek Larson, the Associate Rector here at Good Shepherd.
I'm Sanford Groff, I'm the Rector here.
We are joined today by one of our parishioners and our very own head of school at our school, Mrs. Heather Vaughn. Hi, Heather.
Good morning.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Each week on the podcast, we discuss the passages of Scripture assigned for the upcoming Sunday. And this week is the fifth Sunday of Easter, April 28th, 2024. And the words we hear are from the book of Acts, chapter 8, verses 26 through 40, Psalm 22, verses 24 through 30, 1 John, chapter 4, verses 7 through 21, and the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. Great. So how's it going?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, we're very grateful that you're here.
Thank you.
And we're excited to hear what you think about these. Some of these are very famous passages, so I can't wait to hear what your perspective is.
Okay. I did warn you, this is a little out of my wheelhouse.
And
So I was very nervous to accept Derek's invitation to be here, but I'm open to learning. And
that's right.
Right.
You're modeling what you do every day.
Absolutely. Well,
for the
that's a good
100
point. I am.
and some
So-
odd students that we have.
That's right.
You know? Try new things.
Try new things. Push yourself out of
Right.
your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And what we tell the children is, you can do hard things.
You can
right?
do hard
So
things.
I can do a hard thing too. And
You know who says that to me?
who's that?
The trainer at the gym.
Yes, that's
And
another
I
good play.
hate that line.
I hate that.
You can do hard
You
things.
can do hard things.
Not when
Right.
you have like
Well, this is a little bit easier than
you're
new
running
workout
on a
routine.
treadmill and
I know.
Well, when we have guests on the podcast, we do that because it's good to get different perspectives,
Okay.
and it's not all about having a sort of trained eye, but having an open eye, an attentive eye.
Yeah.
And you have such an interesting role in our community as head of school, and I think that your eye and the way, you came in here and you were saying, it's nice to be around adults because you're around children all day, right?
Right.
And so I wanted you, because you're such an important part of our community, and perhaps your experience working with children can also kind of give us an insight into how we read Scripture. So
Well,
I'm glad that you accepted, and I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's true, you have that, when you have those experiences, when you have your own children, and whatever it is, take them to the beach, take them to Disney, or all those things, going to the dentist, you start reliving, and you have all this,
Oh, right.
right? First you have that, but then after you get over your own, some of the baggage you carry, or some of those experiences,
Yep.
then all of a sudden you go beyond that, and you can really free yourself to put yourself in their place, right? And you start to see it through their eyes, and then it's a whole new experience that's
Exactly.
completely different than the experience we had as children,
Right.
So I hope I can bring some of that to
Yeah,
it'll be
today's
great.
conversation
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, just make yourself at home and
Thank you.
yeah, you're most welcome.
So what's going on at the school these days?
Whoa, we only have 5 weeks left of school. So yeah, you would think everyone would be like, ooh, thank goodness, but we don't. It's really, we don't like to see the year end.
Right.
We become very attached to a certain group of children, and some of them will graduate or move on to other places, and so every year is a brand new start,
Right.
and that brings change
Right.
of a different sort. So we really also want to hold on to what we have now. None of us really wants the year to end. We really want to just keep things the way they are.
Right.
They're comfortable. By this point of the year, it's comfortable.
Right.
We know the personalities and the dynamics of a class, and we know, okay, all this is behind, we know what's coming.
But the end of the year, I've found working in schools is always a bit of it's both a sprint, but it's also like so many activities that happen in very, very quick succession. So you end up being very, very busy
It's a busy
for
time.
5 weeks.
It's a busy time.
It's probably
It's
the
busy.
busiest maybe of the
is.
year, and then it all culminates in the end,
The end.
and then it's done.
It's true.
And it's a very weird experience.
It is,
I find
right?
it as an
It's- you get
educator,
there,
it's kind of
it's
a
very-
weird experience because it's almost like you get to the edge of the cliff and then we're done. And now
that's
there's
it.
nothing.
Right. There's nothing. It just falls
Everyone
off.
goes home and
Yeah.
you're like,
And even though we're running camp all summer, again,
Right.
it's just different. It's a different field, different environment. And then we, as you both know, we're making all the plans for next year.
Right.
So
Right.
everything is 24, 25. And literally put something on the calendar today for next May. We're not even in May yet, and I'm already
Planning.
have to plan for next
Yep.
May. So
Right.
there's
Yep.
also that cycle is so long. Yeah, so it is. It's an odd mix this time
It's
of
a little,
year.
yeah. It's good.
Keeps us busy.
Yes.
This is a good thing.
Yes,
Busy-
but
busy's good.
we have such an incredible school community, though, and you know, a lot of folks at the church, they're aware of the school, but maybe they haven't interacted with the school, and you know, on their own time or in their own experience. And if folks have the opportunity to do that, I encourage it, because it's such an incredible community.
I can use this platform
And,
to welcome people to come in,
Yes.
come visit us, come take a
Yeah.
tour,
Yeah.
volunteer.
Yep.
volunteer.
Just
Yeah.
see what's going on, because I say this all the time, and it was the observation of our accrediting agency, the Florida Council of Independent Schools, when they came in to reaccredit us last year. They said, this is an incredible place of joyful learning.
That's right.
It's a very joyful place. So if you're ever feeling down in the dumps and you need a little pick-me-up, you come visit Good Shepherd School.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
a happy place.
Thank you.
Well, we're here to look at the scripture passages, so why don't we do that?
Let's jump in.
The first passage is from the book of Acts. We are working our way through the book of Acts in the season of Easter, but we are in chapter 8, verses 26 through 40. And this is sort of an odd story where Philip, one of the apostles or one of Jesus's disciples, is out walking in the middle of nowhere. And he encounters this guy in a chariot who's a government official, a court official, all the way from Ethiopia. He's an Ethiopian eunuch who works for the queen, basically. And he overhears the guy reading the book of Isaiah and kind of gets encouragement from an angel of the Lord, it says, to go talk to this guy and to see, you know, what he's all about and why he's reading in the book of Isaiah. And then they have this conversation, and Philip is like, do you understand what it is that you're reading? And the eunuch says, well, how can I unless someone guides me? And so Philip says, okay, and he gets in the chariot, sits down beside him, and then they read the passages of Isaiah, and Philip uses the opportunity to talk about the story of Jesus and what happened to Jesus, and how even the Hebrew scriptures, and in particular Isaiah, is speaking to the reality of Jesus. And so the government official, the eunuch, is excited about that, and they pass some water. He says, okay, well, I want to be baptized. And so Philip baptizes him. And then at the very end, there's this weird moment where it says, the Lord snatched Philip away. He was gone and went to another place, and the eunuch went on his way, and that was that. So I'm sure that the writer of Acts had a particular reason for including this story and what he thought that it meant for the narrative that he was trying to outline. But reading it just on its own, it does need a little bit of conversation and context to understand, well, what is this story about? But I wonder what's striking either of you about this passage, and what do you like about it? What questions do you have about it? Images?
This is a great one to start with for me.
Go for it.
Okay,
Go for it.
because
It's all you.
I just said it wasn't
Yeah.
my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
This
yeah.
is not my wheelhouse,
Right.
and I'm feeling really comfortable with this
Yeah,
one.
good,
This is a
good.
starting
Excellent,
point,
excellent.
because, and I when I read this over, I highlighted, again, how can I unless someone guides me? And now at this point in the conversation, of course, you would think I'm going to jump right into the students,
Right, right.
And that's a very important job we have here
To
with our
guide
students.
the
To
students,
guide
to
them
mentor them, teach
academically,
them.
socially, emotionally. But from most of our students may not have a home church. Most of them don't have a home church, or they may not be going to services on a regular basis. And of course, that is such an important part of our day and our curriculum is that time together Wednesdays,
Right.
and then of course throughout the course of the week, more on our religious curriculum. And so our teachers have to help guide. And again, they are not laymen.
Right.
They're
Right,
laymen,
right.
But they too are guiding our students through that. So this of course jumps out at me, but I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I need that. I look to both of you, obviously, to help me also understand a little bit more of who we are and what our roles are.
Right.
And of course, just everything I'm learning.
Right.
Thanks to both of you, I appreciate that. Just everything from the liturgical calendar and, just really trying to relate what we do in chapel every week, what we then take back to the classroom, and try in life, but just in our everyday life together, in our everyday life. So, this speaks obviously.
This speaks
to that every day.
Right.
Really
And I love this passage, actually.
Do you?
I've actually preached on this passage at St. Mark's. I did many years ago. And the first thing to note about it is the Ethiopian eunuch part. And eunuch is, as you could imagine, it's a little, sensitive in terms of of topics to cover, but you were a eunuch in the ancient world either by birth, right, because you were born with an abnormality, or you could be a eunuch by choice. And you go, why would anyone become a eunuch by choice, which involves, a medical procedure and all of these things? But the reason you would become a eunuch by choice is because ancient royalty did not trust people who could procreate. So ancient royalty, the people who worked closest with royalty and people who had a great degree of wealth only wanted people who were not able to procreate. They did not want there to be confusion about their heirs, right? So eunuchs were actually, competent eunuchs were in high demand within the innermost sanctum of a royal court. And so in this case, this Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians. So he was, the queen's right-hand man and was really, in charge of her entire treasury. I mean, so this guy had this huge amount of responsibility and authority, and he was trusted. And yet so by choice or by birth, one way or the other, he found himself in this position. And so, and yet there was, my reading of this, he had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning home. So they've already been to worship, right? They've already had this experience, and it's unclear to me whether, this was, I assume Jewish worship, right? Maybe it was a festival or something, and was returning home. And so there's this piece to me that wonders if he felt like he could go and worship, or whether he felt maybe on the margins of that experience in Jerusalem. I don't know. That's kind of me reading into it a little bit. But it was here that then, Philip opens to him and not only explains or teaches him, guides him, but then says, you can be baptized. We can do this, and we can do it kind of right here and right now. Here's some water. What's to prevent me from baptizing you? And that's where I think we forget, or historically we've forgotten that there are these people in the Bible, like the Ethiopian eunuch, who are a little out of our normal sense of things, and yet here we see this great passage in Acts 8 where he's welcome to be baptized just like everyone else. There's nothing impeding him. There's nothing that holds him back from being baptized, and regardless of the reasoning or what happened with him, that he's most welcome at God's table.
So that was my question I had here for you. Am I reading that it doesn't matter one's background or their study up to that point, right? That they too are worthy of God's love.
That's right. We don't. It's not something we earn or that we are demographically qualified for, right? We're and I would push that even to even more kind of margins of society and say all are welcome. And what does that look like? And what it looks like oftentimes is one person guiding another person and finding water, and there's the church, right? There it is. Doesn't need to be much more fancy than that.
Well, and that is the arc of the gospel, or the book of Acts.
The book of Acts, right?
Because, it begins with the ascension of Jesus and Jesus giving his last command to the disciples, which is go into the world, Go into all the world. We get that at the end of Matthew. We get that at the end of Mark. We get that at the beginning of Acts, the beginning or the end of Luke. And so it starts, the book of Acts starts in Jerusalem. And the first few chapters are all about Jerusalem. And then suddenly it goes out to Samaria. And you get a couple of stories about Samaritans who are being told the gospel and then are also kind of accepting Christ. Then it goes out even further than that. And here, this is an example of that this is a guy not even from Israel, not even from Jerusalem. He's from another country completely, Ethiopia. We don't know if he's Jewish. He may not have been Jewish, but may have been what we call a God-fearer, which meant he hadn't gone through full conversion, but he still worships the God of Israel. Whatever the case, he is an outsider. He has his foot in the door because he's come to Jerusalem to worship, but he's an outsider. And so we see, we did a Bible study on this passage and on a few other passages in this progression and called it the wideness of God's mercy. That Acts is all about this circle of mercy in Jerusalem getting wider and wider and wider until at the end of Acts, it's spread throughout the entire empire and thus the world and ends in Rome. So it begins in Jerusalem, but it ends all the way across the world in Rome. So I think that's part of it. But to both your point, and then to your point, Heather, what I read in this as well is that teaching and learning are both vocations. And by vocation, I mean it's a calling. It's something that comes from within. It's something that God calls us to do, whether that's a vocation as in we're, our career or we're making money do it, or whether it's a hobby or whether it's just a volunteer aspect of our lives. To teach someone is, God is calling us. God calls us to teach. And then, but also God calls us to learn. And so to teach and to learn is simply about being open to God's Spirit to allow us to do those things. And sometimes we're the teachers, sometimes we're the learners. More often we're both at the same time. Right? And I think Philip here, even though he was the teacher, was also learning something from God in God's call for him to speak to the Ethiopian eunuch. So it's great. It's great.
I love the passage. So anyway,
Psalm 22, verses, not the whole psalm, which is a long psalm, but just verses 24 through 30. And it's a psalm, at this point in the psalm, it's about praise. My praise is of him in the great assembly. I will perform my vows in the presence of those who worship him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied, and those who seek the Lord shall praise him. May your heart live forever. A little further down, my soul shall live for him. My descendants shall serve him. They shall be known as the Lord's forever. They shall come and make known to a people yet unborn the saving deeds that he has done. So at first glance, this psalm is just a happy psalm full of praise. But if we read the whole psalm, which we're not going to this time, but if we were to read the whole psalm, it begins in a moment of despair with those famous words, my God, why have you forsaken me? And which Jesus quotes on the cross. He's speaking the words of the psalm. And so as I'm reflecting on this psalm, I'm thinking about how it's appropriate to read this part of the psalm in the season of Easter. The first part being kind of our Lenten or Holy Week experience of Jesus' death. But then that psalm naturally progresses into a place of praise, into a place of thanksgiving for God's saving work. And so that's the moment that we're in now, in the season of Easter and liturgically, that moment of death didn't stand alone. It leads into this moment of life that we're experiencing in the liturgical calendar. And then even on a less liturgical note, but just more of a prayerful note, often when we are in places of despair, our prayer can lead us to places of hope, or at least lead us to glimpsing places of hope. And sometimes that takes time. But Psalm 22 is such a powerful psalm because we see this experience of someone who is really desperate and has no hope. And yet by the end of the psalm, they do have some sense of hope. Maybe their circumstances haven't changed, but in their prayer, in their giving it over to God, they also find some sense of relief and some sense of faith. When they had no faith at the beginning, at the end, they're not only claiming faith for themselves, but they're claiming that faith for their descendants and for those yet unborn. So just a little encouragement, I think, for us to think about the power of prayer and bringing our honest, vulnerable despair before God so that God might be able to lead us to even a glimmer of hope, right, in the midst of our circumstances.
Maybe not understanding those circumstances, but having the faith and
and recognizing that God's with us in it.
Right.
Yeah. Did either of you have thoughts on this passage?
For me, it was really, I went right to, they shall come and make known to people yet unborn. Just the idea of something of, we talk about eternity or infinity or things that go on and on. It's hard for us to see beyond our own, the time we spend here on earth sometimes. We're so focused on ourselves and our time and our despair, our joys, all that. And I do like the imagery of the generations and things that go on, and we are giving that gift for generations that are yet to be born.
I love that. That's good.
I do too.
I think these are the thoughts that I've had encapsulated in your words and your words. So I'm good.
Nothing to add on this one.
I have nothing to add on this one, I don't think.
All right.
I want to move on to love.
Love.
Good.
Yes.
The second
next
reading,
one.
1 John, which is actually a long passage for one of our readings this week, but 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 21. We are working our way through 1 John in the season of Easter, and it's a famous passage. It begins, "Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might have life through him." And then it continues by talking about abiding in God, abiding in God's love, and abiding in God through confessing that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus has demonstrated love for us. And then another famous phrase, God is love. And those who abide in love abide in God.
It's we just talked about this in Bible study.
Right.
And it's Wednesday, by the way. And, what I love about this, I love a couple things. But first, there's a almost poetic, melodic way in which the author weaves together, I like the word braids, kind of with different strands that overlay one another all the way through a kind of a meditation on how love, it works within the relationship we have with God. And I love that those braids, if you think of that as kind of a rope or, something, hair or something, maybe not hair, but something that is braided together, bread, I like that. That it begins where it ends, right? Beloved, let us love one another. And then at the end of chapter 4, verse 21, the commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters too. And so what it creates is this beautiful, intricate kind of braid that is a circle, ultimately. And for me, it's kind of a, someone at Bible study said, it's a bit repetitive. And I said, yes, but the point of that is that it's using the same ideas, and yet it's progressing our own thoughts and feelings about love, even through our journey or our frustrations or our tension that we have with our own fears. It even takes us through fear. And it says, you don't need to be afraid because God is love. And that love kind of casts out fear and puts fear in the right perspective. And so it's just, again, it's that idea that that yes, it is a bit repetitive, but that doesn't mean that it's stagnant. It's moving through a particular way of engaging with God, who is love, and engaging then in a way that we're able to love our brothers and our sisters, which I thought was, it's famous for a reason. This is a very famous, If you know anything from 1 John, you know this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do now.
Now you do.
Now
But what are your thoughts? Just taking a look at a rather long passage.
And I went in a little different direction.
Love that. Okay. I normally go in the different directions here.
I went in a very different direction because
fresh eyes, we call that.
Fresh eyes. Yep. Here's your fresh eyes, though.
Yep.
All right, and this is the mother in me. I thought I was a good mother. I mean, I am a good mother, but I also, when the children were young and start questioning, I also very often would say, because I said so.
Right.
You just
Classic.
pick up the clothes because I said to pick up your clothes, right?
Right.
I mean, classic.
Because it turns out when they're saying why, they don't actually care what the rationale behind that is.
Exactly.
Right.
So
I don't even have children. And I know
you
that.
know this.
Right.
We all know this, right?
I was a child once.
Right. Yeah, would never speak to the students that way, mind you. This is just my own children. My children when they were little. Exactly.
That's good.
Right. And when I read this, why should I love my brothers and sisters? It's not because God's telling me I need to. It's not you love them.
Right.
I love this since God loved us so much. So for me, it was because that's my answer. Because God loves me, I love you.
Right.
That's why.
It all starts with God.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It starts and ends. And
It starts and ends.
Yeah.
I love that.
And it actually, I think when I read that, I feel like my heart is bigger and more open and more loving. It's just a different perspective, right? It's just a little different perspective on the why.
You should have tried that with your kids. Why should I clean up my room? Because I cleaned it up first. Right? Does that work? You got young children.
It won't work. But it makes us feel better. Right. Because I do it.
Right. Because I do it. Right.
I do it. And
now you do it.
Yeah.
Right. But I actually love thinking about this as a child, And by that I do mean not a child of God, which is a wonderful thing, but actually as an immature agent or practitioner of love, someone who's new at loving, and that and then kind of going through this almost in circles in a very repetitive way, in the same way that I'm sure once or twice you had to do with your own children to get them to clean up their room or whatever. That's spiritual. It's a spiritual exercise, and yet at some level we need to hear it just that often in order to remember, hey, God has already done this, and you're participating in that great gift. That's awesome.
Yeah, our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, one of the things he preaches about love all of the time. And of course, his famous homily at the royal wedding a few years ago, everyone wanted to talk to him about that, but it was about love. And so that's all he preaches all the time. But he, when people ask him about it, he says, well, if it's not about love, it's not about God. Right. And I think that this passage is kind of pointing us to that idea that God is not just loving, God is love.
Right.
I mean, it is God's being. And when we love one another, it's not just that we are acting like God. It's not just that we are loving because God loved us. All of that's true. But when we love one another, we are actually with God. Because God is in the midst of that relationship. God is in the midst of that love. To love another person is to be present to God, to be open and aware and attentive to God's presence among us. So love really is the core. And sometimes we make religion out to be about what's up here in our minds, what we believe or what we think about the world and about God and about others. Sometimes we make it about rules and what we should do, or about in-groups and out-groups, who belongs and who doesn't belong, who has said the proper formula. But when it comes down to it, it is about love. It's all about love, not only loving others, but receiving the love of God and allowing the love of God within you to come out and love one another. It's all about love, right?
It's all about love.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
And this passage in 1 John First John is written by a similar author as the Gospel of John. Some people believe that it's the same John. Some people say it was not the same John, but it was someone that was inspired by the Gospel writer. Whatever the case, last week and this week we are getting two images that linked together. Last week was the image of laying down one's life, that Jesus laid down his life. And we got that both in the Gospel of John and in the second reading, the First John. This week we're getting a similar image. In First John we hear the language of abiding in God, and then when we move to the Gospel of John chapter 15, 1 through 8, the image is also of abiding. Jesus says to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine and you are the branches." So these two passages actually connect really well together through that image of abiding, and in particular through the image of a vine and the branches that come from the vine. But I think that makes clear, when we're talking about the love of God and our own love is flowing out of the love, out of our connection to God. It's not separate from God, but when we abide in God, when we're connected to God like a branch is to a vine, then the nutrients that come up through that vine flow through the vine and flow right into us, and we produce fruit. It's not about anything that you or I have to do. It's just about being open and connected to the love of God and to God, God's self. Jesus is that vine that we're connected to.
This is the perfect imagery too. Tending to a garden.
Yeah.
There couldn't have been a better choice for that imagery of tending to the garden, and you see the plant needing a little bit of pruning, but then it just flourishes. Right? So I love the imagery there. And it ties so well into the homily today. Our homily
in chapel
today. When you're seeing God in nature, right? Seeing God in nature, and we all feel that connection when we're outside.
Right.
So this for me was just spot on the timing as well.
So I'm going to take a different approach a little bit. When I lived in Baltimore, we lived in the city, and I lived in this row house, kind of at the backyard. There wasn't really a backyard, but there was a fence kind of out on this back alley that the house backed up to, and the fence had a vine that was growing on the fence. And we were renting. We didn't, I was whatever, 27 years old. Who cares? And so one day I came home and I got the mail, and there was a letter from the city of Baltimore, and it was a ticket. I got a citation for letting the vine grow, and I went out, and this vine had taken over the entire fence. I mean, it was over the fence. It was in the neighbor's. It wasn't a yard, but neighbor's back alley, and whenever I get to this passage, I often think of that vine and how tenacious it was, because the landlord, just a few months prior to this ticket, had come back and she had really pruned it back. But of course, as you know, if you've done any gardening, when you prune things like that back, they come back with a vengeance, right? And it was but for me, it was a weed. I don't really know what it was, but it's that kind of resilience, that abundance, that tenacious, we're going to scale the fence, we're going to change the world. I mean, that's the kind of Jesus that I like to follow and believe in, and the Jesus that I feel when I'm feeling a bit tired or whatever is that type of vine.
The tenacity of it.
Yeah, the tenacity of it, and the one that, gets you a ticket that ended up, I can't remember who ended up paying for the I think we paid for it.
Rather than the landlord?
I think the landlord had kind of implied that you guys should just...
You live here? You
cut this back.
You're stewarding it.
Yeah. We bought some shears and took care of business. So it was interesting though, and I always think of that, and I love how it keeps us all connected in that tenacity and abundance.
That's good.
Yeah.
Great image. Well, I think that that's a good place to wrap it up for today.
It goes by quickly, doesn't it?
I wish this could go on forever. This is great. I love this.
It's good. It's great. It's a gift.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah, thanks for joining us and
Yeah.
taking time out of your
Truly,
busy day.
I did enjoy this time together.
So,
Thank you.
yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate
Come
it.
back anytime.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners as well. We're so glad that you're with us in wherever you are, whether it's in the car or at home, watching on a computer screen, listening to the audio. It's great to have you kind of reflecting on these passages with us. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast, whether it's on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, so that you never miss an episode, and share it with your friends. It's always good to share. We look forward to worshiping with you this Sunday, and we hope that now you feel a little more prepared to hear these words. Bye.